Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
The last few weeks included celebrating our nation's independence and tackling real life that comes with being parents and living life during Minnesota summer. Thank you for bearing with us during our brief absence. We're back to our regularly scheduled programming and are excited for a great roundtable with two of our favorites. Today, we welcome Julius Hernandez and former Representative Kelly Fenton back to the show for a roundtable discussion on a variety of topics. Julius joins us to hold down the fort for the Democrats, while Representative Fenton will bring it home for the Republicans. Per usual, these two are also expert communicators and will bring their principles and sass with us for the next hour or so. We are going to start by breaking down the trial of Senator Nicole Mitchell that is underway after more than a year of delays and excuses. We will then get into all things Jeffrey Epstein and find out what our panelists think about a client list or lack thereof. Then we will discuss the recent news of Governor Tim Walz racking up more than $400,000 in legal fees as he prepared for his testimony at a U.S. House Oversight Committee hearing on immigration in sanctuary cities. We will continue on with our conversation about Governor Walz by hitting on the recent polls about Governor Walz's approval ratings and what it means for Walz's political future, either as a third-term governor or on the national stage. And we will round things out by introducing the launch of Michael's new Substack. Thank you for joining us today and enjoy the show. We are excited to have both of you with us for an action-packed episode. We have lots of really good topics to get through. And let's start with one that we have touched on quite a number of times on this show, Senator Nicole Mitchell and the burglary charge, felony charges she is facing, and currently, finally, after almost a year and 3 months or so, trial has begun. They had jury selection, or jury was seated on Monday. Opening statements were delivered Tuesday. It's an ongoing trial. And again, this stems from her allegedly breaking into her stepmother's home. She was found in the basement. And I want to break down everything that we've seen so far, and starting with the body cam footage that has come out. The jurors were shown two separate 40-minute videos. They show her dressed in all black, a black hat, black shirt, black leggings with a flashlight covered with a black sock, coming out of the bathroom with her hands up and at one point saying, "Clearly, I'm not good at this, and I've known I've done something bad." Representative, I want to start with you. This is the district that you represented as well when you were in the legislature. Talk to us a little bit about the circus we're seeing coming out of this trial.
Look, I caught up a little bit yesterday on it, and I could tell you it's been a circus since she alleged first was arrested and had charges brought forward. But watching everything yesterday and looking at that video and even following the comments, it was hard to find anybody to say, you know what, how can you find her innocent after seeing all of this? Immediately, once she was arrested. Look, for Woodbury, we had some significant projects we needed monies for. She was carrying the bill in the Senate. Many of the Senate members were then getting off of her bills and things like that. They didn't want to really have anything to do with that. And thus, that's why I say Woodbury really hasn't had representation since this happened. But there are a few things following this trial that I want to remind people of and I want people to be aware of. Number one is the victim. The victim is Carol Mitchell, and we cannot forget that. That's the victim. The other thing is surrounding the trial and what I was looking at with the defense and that, I don't think people realize, but her father, I think people thought, oh, her father had recently passed away. And the reality is that the estate had already been settled. He had been gone more than a year plus, and the state had already been settled. Thus, she was given whatever she should have received from whatever the state had dictated that she had rightful ownership to. So we need to remember that. And there's a proper procedure. If you feel that you wanted things from the estate that you were not given, that's why we have lawyers in the courts within estate law. So I want people to remember that. The victim is Carol Mitchell, and that estate of her father had already been settled, meaning she would have already received what her father wanted her to receive at that time. As I followed the defense, my mother has Alzheimer's, and I understand what that's like. But as I followed the defense, no, If I were to do a welfare check on my mother, I would have never gone in the middle of the night. I would have never dressed differently than my mother would normally ever see me in. I just think that this is not going to bode well for Senator Mitchell when the jury finally makes a decision. From what I saw in the last few days, this isn't going to go well for her.
Now, Julius, like the representative said, some of the defense is saying that they don't dispute that she entered without permission. In fact, they say that she would have pled guilty to a trespassing charge, but they're really highlighting her intent. And the intent that they say is that she entered for a welfare check on her stepmom, Carol Mitchell, who she said was deteriorating due to Alzheimer's. And they agree with the prosecution on some of these facts, right? They say because of her paranoia, she did park down the street. That's why she didn't use the key. That's why she entered through a basement window. And it's because Carol Mitchell had started barricading the doors. There's certainly some of the facts they're trying to, from my bias, twist to their side, which is their job as the defense. What's your take on this? I know we've talked about it a little bit, but when you look at what we've heard from opening statements and the body cam footage, where do you stand on things?
Yeah, I think it's like it's a hard defense because you're admitting to crimes and then being like, we did some of the crime and we didn't do all of it. I probably think Nicole Mitchell should have stepped down a year ago. Like I know this was a whole thing and she probably just stepped down and spared everyone else the time. And also, like Representative Fenton said, just let someone do the job of representing and legislating without any serious like interference like this case. It's taken up a lot of time in the Senate, but yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I'm not totally convinced it's the best defense strategy, but also here's what I'll say to you. I've had two of my four grandparents die from Alzheimer's. It gets weird, right? Things get odd. Like people start, I think it's called sundowning, and do things that they wouldn't normally do that lead them maybe to barricade doors or be aggressive to their family members. That's not something that's out of the ordinary. And so I would also say the facts of the case are the facts of the case, and we'll see what a jury thinks. I think there's a lot that I didn't even know when I started watching some of these opening statements, and I think it'll be interesting to see if they side with her and think that maybe this is just a woman with Alzheimer's who maybe took this away that it wasn't supposed to be. But also it's weird that on a body camera footage she's wearing a black beanie and all black to go into a house in the middle of the night. It's really hard. Like optics are everything, obviously, and those optics of that video were not very good for her. Yeah.
And Michael,
this is a serious issue, but I have to say it's when she was getting dressed for whatever it was she was doing. I think she took a page from the Wet Bandits in Home Alone too. I don't understand it though. Honestly, I think in all seriousness, this is a serious issue and Carol is the victim. And I think she was absolutely terrified. I remember the interview that Tom Hauser did with her immediately after this happened, and she didn't mince her words in that interview. I do think it was part of the defense strategy to kick the can down the road because, as again, my mother has Alzheimer's, and Julius, you probably know this too, that cognitive slide can happen at some point. And the question I would have is, sure, the mom may be mixing some things up, has some things straight, some not. But at what's the cognitive slide since this first occurred? But when you go back and look at that interview that she did with Tom Hauser, it's hard. She did not mince words. And I would have never thought, wow, okay, there's something cognitively impaired with the stepmother. Not at all. So I do think it was part of the defense to kick this can down the road as far as it's gone and put the trial off as long as it's been put off.
and I do want to hit on that because I tend to agree, but Michael, I want to kind of stick on this intent. It seems to be you probably more than any of us have really dove into true crime and research and all of that that comes in some cases and background and legal proceedings. It really seems to come down to this intent, and the prosecution's argument is saying that it is the intent doesn't really matter, that the defense is going to focus on their opening statement as they say, when the judge instructs you on the law in this case, you'll learn that any why won't amount to an illegal excuse. That's because no amount of grief or frustration can justify a home break-in. They hit on the fact that in Mitchell's own words, that it makes it clear that she was there to take items, and under the law, that is enough that there is there to prove, are required to prove a burglary and unlawful entry with the intent to commit a crime inside. So talk to us a little bit about that intent. And they found her in the basement dressed in all black with things in her backpack. Yeah.
You could not, first of all, I'm not aware, first of all, I'm not a lawyer. And Becky, as we know, you are the legal analyst for the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky because you did attend law school for a short period of time. I am surprised when we were bringing this subject up that for as long as we've been doing this podcast, here we are finally discussing the actual trial that's now that it's started. I'm not aware, and I'll leave people to listen to this episode and certainly reply. I'm not aware that anything that Mitchell is offering as a defense would be in essence considered an affirmative defense, meaning an excuse to do what she did. I think it's an excuse, but it's not a legal excuse that exists in the law where you can have an affirmative defense to in doing things, that you admit to the elements of the crime, but your affirmative defense as laid out in the law is basically a carve out or allowance that allows you to permit that and and be engaged in that type of illegal activity. I want to go a step further and respectfully correct the record with Representative Fenton. The wet bandits would have been smarter not to dress like that. And actually, there's a great Simpson episode where Marge and Homer are going to break in and cause some vandalism. And they literally say in the episode, the costume store would be upset if they found out we were actually using these burglary outfits to commit a burglary and do this type of stuff. That's the way Mitchell was dressed, right out of central casting. There is simply no conceivable way. As I watched that body camera footage, I'm not a member of the jury. I'm trying to pay attention as best I can to what's going on. But the optics of what we saw on camera and what we saw in that recording is abundantly clear. She broke into the house. She was dressed to break into that house. When the cops come around the corner, she has her hands up like this. It's simply not credible. And one word that gets thrown around a lot in politics is gaslighting. It is legal gaslighting for anyone on her defense team to go up there and try to claim that she was there for any other reason other than to break in and to break the law. Now, to Representative Fenton's point and to Julius's point, I was very surprised by how on camera, in the body camera, how concise and crisp Nicole Mitchell's stepmother was. She had just called police because she had found someone inside her home. There was obviously some excitement, some adrenaline rushing, but she was able to articulate what was going on. I now understand why there was a fight to not release this body camera footage, because it's devastating. Everything that I've seen so far to date, in my opinion, shows that Mitchell should not be a member of the Senate. I don't think this trial is going to go well for her. I think and we'll see what happens. But I will also say, yes, Carol Mitchell is a victim. But who also is a victim is that this has been a distraction from legislative work. This has been an ongoing drama, an unnecessary drama. And the footage that I've seen so far and what's been released into the record as part of the criminal trial is worse than what I expected.
I just have one point too that I find incredibly fascinating. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Becky. No, I was just going to say, I think I'm really excited to hear why she stood in the house. If that's one of the points I think the defense is trying to make, is like she didn't leave, which, just to play devil's advocate in this case, Nicole Mitchell would probably be the devil, is like this idea that she just went to the basement. She didn't leave. Her stepmother didn't know who she was and couldn't identify who the person was that was in her house. If you're like, why didn't you leave the house? So that makes me question a little bit. Maybe there's some like underlying facts that we're missing, and that'll come out through the course of the trial. But
not
generally,
good facts.
Not good facts, right? But generally, the point being, like, I just think, like, you're a smart person. Why would you not leave?
I would add to that, too, that the stepmother stumbled over. She was lying beside the bed. There's so many things with this. If this is information that I had read the report once it was out initially, and just there were so many things wrong with this, but not once, but more than once, she admitted she did something really wrong, that she was in trouble. And so she knew which there are those people that maybe don't know better. She absolutely knew. And let me bring up a point that in campaigning with Senator Mitchell, Nicole Mitchell, she, at every event we were at, she made a point to tell everybody that she is a lawyer. I would think you would know better. But I agree that just so many things wrong with this whole, with her being there, and why she didn't use the key, why she was dressed how she was, like you said, Julius, why she went to the basement. It's, again, and Michael, I agree. This isn't going to go well. And I think it's going to be a stain on the Senate leadership that they did not get rid of her right away. She continued to be a distraction. Woodbury has had no representation. People out in Woodbury are really angry about that. And I think it will end up being a stain as to how the Senate leadership handled what to do with her.
Well, we'll certainly be watching as things play out the rest of this week and come back with updates as we have them. I think one of those updates will be if she does end up resigning. Yes, Michael.
I was just going to say to that point, if Senator Mitchell resigns and there's a special election, is there anyone currently on the show that lives in that district that might be considered a candidate? Representative Fenton?
Thanks for trying to put me on the spot, Michael, but I'm not buying it. No way, no how would I run for that position. As it is, let's just talk about the facts. You're so close to the next election already as it is. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, having to run for that Senate seat only to do it all over again months down the road is just almost like a bad fraternity sorority haze for people. But I'm not interested. I'll be honest, I've been asked, but I just think it's time. I'm happy to pass the torch to new and fresh emerging leaders here in Woodbury.
Becky, as I listen to her talk, she's not ruling it out. So that's how I take it. So let's
tell me there's a chance.
I open to your interpretation. You're telling me there's a chance.
We'll take your expertise on the podcast as that hopeful special election plays out in the next coming months. Do you want to keep us moving here? Because like I said, action-packed episode here. Another interesting circus, I will say, is surrounding the Epstein client list, or lack thereof. This is something that Republicans and Democrats have fallen on both sides of. On both sides point to their opponents as being close to Epstein and on his client list, and who really knows, but this is something that it seems to have triggered the MAGA base quite a bit, largely surrounding Attorney General Pam Bondi suggesting in February that it was on her desk. She now has said that the case file in general was on her list, not the client list, because now FBI DOJ memo says there is no client list. Again, this is something that now they're also saying there's a truckload of evidence, but now the Justice Department says they're sealing, they don't want to release it. And this really has riled up the MAGA base, largely because, again, they say they really pounded that they were going to be revealing major revelations. It was going to be a big deal about Epstein, his alleged clientele. And now, supposedly, that's not the case. Before I get into the PR spin that comes after this, Julius, tell us what you and your Democrat friends think about this flip-flop with Trump and his administration when it comes to an alleged client list.
Listen, I remember a time when Donald Trump campaigned on a phrase, promises made, promises kept. This is just another example of promises made, promises abandoned. Seriously, like when you have the Attorney General of the United States, the FBI director, the deputy FBI director, all these, excuse my language, nutballs out here saying something is so much bigger than it really is, or that they're going to do all this stuff and then they don't do it. That's a bad look. And especially because I don't really think that they understood how much it probably amplified the Republican base or the MAGA base. This was an issue that was talked about during the course of the election multiple times. And interestingly enough, I went back knowing that we were going to talk about this subject, and I was like, how many times did Donald Trump talk about Jeffrey Epstein? And I could find a total of 5 times during the course of the election that he actually mentioned something about him. And I thought it was the most fascinating thing because most of that was driven by his campaign staff, his cabinet secretaries who are now his cabinet secretaries. And I just love that MAG is getting really pissed off at him. I think it's great. I think that they should answer for why they aren't releasing these documents, because it's either one thing or it's either two things. You were incredibly irresponsible and made something larger than it was actually, or you're covering up something. And there's really, I don't think, any nuance in that. And I think those are really the only two reasons that these Republicans wouldn't be wanting to put these files out. So I'm very interested to see what happens. But this is just another Republican failure, I guess.
Now, there on the Republican side, there's a couple different factions of what we're seeing. We're seeing or hearing that Trump and some of his aides are talking to some of their allies in the communications PR world, asking them to stand down. Charlie Kirk who has once been amplifying all of this, has said, I'm done talking about Epstein. I'm going to trust my friends in government. Other folks like Joe Rogan, who has talked about this a lot, is staying course. We have Representative Lauren Boebert, who says she is staying strong on this. We deserve the truth about the Epstein files. I'm ready for a special counsel to handle this. Speaker Johnson is pushing for full transparency, backing Thomas Massie on this, calling for Bondi to clarify about the client list. Representative, any take or insight from you from the Republican side of things on the break between all of the Republican supporters, and did the Trump campaign or President Trump and his team screw the pooch on this one?
I got a lot of thought on this. First of all, I really never cared about, maybe I'm horrible. I didn't care about the Epstein files. I just want people, the powers that be, to do their job and put the criminals in. I never really cared about the files to begin with. I have a lot of thoughts. Of course, one thing is, I do believe, as I get into my thoughts, I do want to just state this. I do believe a lot of this chaos right now is brought on by Trump's administration himself. I think a lot of people spoke too soon. It's possible they didn't look at the files and they made comments and then they went back. But here are some of my thoughts. I've always wondered if from the beginning this wasn't 100% overhyped to begin with. And life isn't as exciting as one would think it is. And I think evil people do evil things. That is absolutely a given. I think that, again, the MAGA-based Republicans have been pretty united until this came up. So this opens the perfect door for dim leadership and those that dislike Trump, that want to just continually to fuel the flames, because it is driving all these people into just apoplectic about this issue, which was surprising to me because I just have never really latched onto it as intently as other people have. Now, that being said, I do find the Dems right now, I think there's a lot of political theater going on too. I think the Dems are dishonest, acting like they really want to release the files, because they could have released them when they had full control, when they had the White House, the Congress, and Senate. And I don't think people are buying that either. I think it's perfect thing, though, to put the wedge in, create that wedge for the MAGA base and other Republicans who care deeply about this issue. Look, again, I worked at the legislature on the child trafficking stuff, and I absolutely detest the vile actions that happen within that. And I want anybody, whether it be the trafficker or the buyer, to do long time in jail for that. But this is just something we really don't know what we don't know. And so is it possible that this was 100% overhyped to begin with? I think it might be, but at the same time, Trump's administration basically put him in this position he's in right now.
Michael, what's your take?
I think that it's fascinating for me to see that Trump's most diehard supporters come to the conclusion that he's not the best at keeping his word. I think that's pretty remarkable. It's pretty remarkable to see that. I just want this trafficking and conspiracy theories, first of all, and overhyping things, to use some of what Representative Fenton said, is par for the course for Donald Trump. This is someone who pushed one of his conspiracies that he first pushed to launch himself into the political landscape was the Obama birth certificate. He sent investigators to Hawaii, and he was famously quoted saying, "I have people that actually have been studying it, and they cannot believe what they're finding." That's been a pattern with Donald Trump, to overhype, to overstate, to overpromise, and then rush in. This Epstein matter, there's a series of things that Trump said he was going to do within the first day, ended a war with Russia and the Ukraine, tariff deals and other things that he's consistently not met the deadlines on. The Epstein matter is, I think, really sensitive, and it's also really gross. First and foremost, no one in any way should condone, tolerate, or allow any type of trafficking of anyone, particularly children. What Jeffrey Epstein was accused of, went to jail for, and all of the matters in this are simply some of the most unimaginable crimes that I think anyone with a heart could ever think of. But the reality is that the MAGA base was promised this. The Attorney General went out there and said what she said. I understand that she's now trying to dial it back and saying case files, but this is an unforced error by the Trump administration, and it shows the level by which conspiracy, misinformation, and this is such a motivating force inside MAGA. Donald Trump won the presidency in 2024 in a large part, in an overwhelming part, because of him flaming and pushing these types of conspiracies. The people around him wanted this done. And so this infighting that's going on right now, first of all, I'm disappointed by it for one reason, and that I've been pretty consistent about. Even when I don't support the president or vote for that particular person and they win, I want my president to succeed. Will always be my policy, within reason, okay? I want the presidency, because if the president is succeeding, America is succeeding. The bottom line here is that this is a distraction, but it's a distraction of Donald Trump and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and everyone else is making, everyone inside MAGA world. It is a distraction. It's a shameful distraction, but it's a distraction. I have seen Republicans in Minnesota spend more time messaging internally and trying to cool the kind of inflamed anger about the Epstein files than any kind of other winning issue. Let me tell you something. No one in the suburbs that's an undecided voter gives a frog's fat ass about the Epstein files. This is a self-created problem for the MAGA base. But the bottom line is, when you allow the MAGA base and that kind of this kind of toxic kind of conspiracy to be so heavily involved inside the apparatchiks of the government, it can grind into a halt. And the bottom line is the failure of the Attorney General to understand who Donald Trump's political base is and to handle this in such a ham-fisted way has the potential to derail progress and things that the Trump administration wants done, because their base is unhappy and they're going to stay unhappy.
If I can make a point too about this, Representative Fenton called it like Democratic theater. Thomas Massey, a Republican from Kentucky, has tried to get a bill passed that would force the release of the Epstein files, and every Republican in Congress, except I think maybe a few, voted against it. So voted against it. There was only a few that voted for it. And so I think the broader thing here though is like when the president goes from an administration that brings in a bunch of influencers like libs of TikTok and has them go outside with folders that say Epstein files, and then just a couple months later his response is all these weirdos need to let go of this Epstein garbage. It was created by Democrats. It's just a broader example of Republicans not being able to govern properly, effectively, and with a steady hand. It's the same way he's conducted himself with the tariffs, where one day he has them, one day he doesn't. It's the same way Republicans have governed in the House, where they can't seem to get their feet under and to slow things down and to move intentionally. They just say stuff, and then everyone else has to respond, or everyone else has to make a move off of that. I think, but also I would just like to point out too, Donald Trump and Republicans with the Pizzagate and all of these crazy conspiracy theories, like Michael was saying, have opened the door for a majority or a large part of their base to be really pissed off because they were promised something that they believed to be bigger than it was.
Correct.
And it's not even about Donald Trump, I don't think. It's not about Republicans, it's about transparency. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Because here's the truth. If Donald Trump was in those files, which I think is partially maybe a reason they don't want to release them, I don't think MAGA would care anyways. I don't think they'd give a damn. But they just want to see what's in them. And I think that's the reality of the situation, which even if Donald Trump was in there committing crimes, they wouldn't care. They just want the files because they were promised the files. And he calls himself the most transparent administration in history. This doesn't seem the most transparent.
I do tend to agree on a large part of that it's about the transparency. I got to chuckle a little bit, Julius, that you bash the conspiracy theories and slide right into, but Trump's probably in the files. We each have,
Hey,
Well,
listen,
we
there's
each
a
have
lot of
sides.
pictures of them together.
And Clinton.
There's a lot of
You
pictures
know.
of them together. I don't know. Hey, I never said he wasn't. He's a weirdo too.
Fair.
Wow. There's the pull quote. I
Fair.
just think, again, the point I would just say is I think that this is also the first time we've seen, and again, Trump is a masterful campaigner. This is the first time I think that we've seen him get eaten up and get distracted and get off his game by his own base supporters. I'm going to tell you something. If Donald Trump doesn't release if the Trump administration doesn't release the Epstein files, that will absolutely deflate the MAGA intensity that the Republican Party needs to go into the 2026 elections. It will be deflating. And the fact that the Trump administration doesn't understand that problem, and I also think that this is one of the first times we've ever seen them turn on them in such an aggressive way. Trump is at a press conference asking, at a cabinet meeting saying, why are people still talking about this? Because his base wants to. And there's a real disconnect, I think, for one of the first times, I think, between Donald Trump and his base over this issue. And it's very interesting to see it develop. Obviously, as Representative Fenton said, accurately, this is a gross crimes that occurred. This is incredibly sensitive information. I hope it's handled responsibly. But the bottom line is Trump made a promise, and for him not to understand why his base is so angry and frustrated with him, I think is a unique circumstance.
And I think that one thing that I'm most going to be watching as well is, as you alluded to, the impact it's going to have on the 2026 election, because not only is it going to take some of the wind out of the sails of the MAGA folks, but potentially it's going to be a situation where they are going to turn on their candidates or members of Congress and saying, are you willing to hold Trump and his administration to this statement? Where do you stand on this? And let me tell you, the last thing we want to have to be arguing going into the 2026 election are Epstein files instead of, and again, I say this as somebody who's not a massive Trump supporter, but who is a Republican supporter. And I'd rather than being able to go into that election standing on the big, beautiful bill and the economic policies and the different things that the Trump administration, I know, Julius, we'll get into that at some point. I see your little scowl there, but so that's what we're going to be watching. That's not only just a little over a year and a half away. So we're in election season. So we'll watch that as that comes. But I do want to now transition to something that was released this week, and that is invoices surrounding the $430,000 spent by Governor Walz to prepare for the June 12th congressional hearing in the U.S. House Oversight Committee. This was a hearing about sanctuary cities and their sanctuary state policies, Minnesota's compliance with federal immigration laws, and we all know he was there. In everything that was going on, we did not discuss really the kind of battle in particular between Walz and Congressman Majority Whip Emmer and Congressman Pete Stauber, but it was contentious and it was a circus, and my little Republican communications heart loved watching it because it certainly was doing what the committee was looking to do. But our focus is more so right now on the almost $500,000 that Governor Walz spent on this, or the invoices have come out for. Again, this is something that Walz's office is saying, this was a political stunt. I didn't want to go. They made me go, which may or may not be true. Obviously, he did ask to not go. They did say, no, you need to come. I'm going to stand on the argument here of what I've seen from Representative Niska put out and behind this. Governor Walz was in Congress for 12 years. Our Attorney General, an attorney, was in Congress for 12 years. They are both well adept at knowing how to navigate committees. And as Gina Countryman, a Senate staffer here, one of my first bosses, tweeted, "It's ridiculous that two former 12-year members of Congress who have served in statewide office since 2019 consider themselves ill-equipped to prepare for a congressional hearing about Minnesota laws they helped pass." Representative Fenton, I'm going to throw it to you on this one to give us your take as somebody who has spent time at the legislature, has been watching these folks over the years. Is this wild?
It is to some extent, but it tells me a few things. And these are my thoughts on seeing how much money he wasted of the Minnesota taxpayer dollars. I think it's clear that Tim Walz wants to run for president. I think he wanted to leverage the congressional hearing for clippable moments for when he makes a presidential run. But now that he got caught spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, he claims that he actually didn't want to be there. But I think the reality is that he didn't want the national disaster of the deer in the headlights type of scenario in which he got when he participated in the vice presidential debate. This is a lot of money. He should have just gone and just answered what he wanted to answer. I don't think he needed to spend that much money for a congressional hearing, especially after being there. And when I looked to see the different things that they were looking into for him, I think it was clear he spent taxpayer dollars because he wanted some clippable moments from that hearing.
Julius, Walz's office, like I said, put out a statement that said, "What's most frustrating is that Tom Emmer and Pete Stauber planned this spectacle knowing what it would cost and went through with it anyways." What do you think?
Oh, man. And just with all due respect to all of my friends in the Republican Party and to all Republicans I'm about to say this about, you people are so bored and all your attacks are so boring and they're so lazy. You guys have really gotten lazy here, truly. First of all, let's be clear about a couple of things. Just from my perspective, my opinion, this is where I put on my DFL partisan hack hat, and I'm really excited about it because I believe it. First of all, Republicans from our state put on this sham hearing because they're too scared to take on Tim Walz for governor. So the only way they can do it and make him look bad is by trying to bring him to Congress on their turf. And they didn't even really do a good job of that, okay? I think if you want to make the argument, the reality is Republicans wasted taxpayer money by making Walz come to D.C. to do a hearing, to have to prep for the hearing. Every person in this country that gets called by a subpoena to get in front of Congress gets lawyers to prepare for those hearings because there are things you don't want to get yourself in trouble by saying. Walz is notoriously sometimes says things that are not taken, whatever you say
Or
about
not
it, I don't
true.
care. You can make your opinions about that all you want. Or, hey, listen, he's lied sometimes. He's gotten it wrong. I'm not going to sit here and defend him and say he's told the truth every time. But that's the point. And when you have hacks like Pete Stauber and Tom Emmer who are too scared to take him on
Congressman
in the governor's race,
Stauber and Congressman Emmer.
when they get too scared to take him on in the race, then they bring him to Congress and try to make him look bad, which they didn't do. I think it's also clippable moments by Walz. I don't think he had any of them. And in fact, like you said, Becky, he asked not to go because it's a waste of time and it was a sham hearing. So all I'll say is, listen, every elected official that goes in front of Congress through a subpoena gets lawyers to prepare. The amount of money you can say is a lot, but Republicans made him come when he said no or when he asked to not show up. And so they have some responsibility to bear. And the Attorney General has better things to do than sit and prep Walz for a sham hearing. I think that's just the reality of how this state works. So I would just ask my Republican friends, is this what we're going into 2026 with? I would really love if you guys would challenge us and make our party a little bit better by being more competitive. But this is not the way to do it. You guys are really bored. That's really how I feel about it.
I appreciate your candor and excitement about this because I feel just as strongly on my side of things. First, I will say, make him look bad. We don't have to do that. We'll talk about that in the polls here shortly. And get lawyers. He has lawyers. And this is largely Representative Niska and the Republicans' argument here. He has legal counsel. He has communication and PR experts that are already paid for in administration. And Keith Ellison might have better things to do, but can we say that he has better things to do than spend $500,000 of taxpayer dollars? Because to me, and let me say, I again, I'm saying this as somebody who worked in Congress, as somebody who has worked on the Republican side, I do understand that this is a spectacle that they were looking to do. If that's such the case, if this wasn't largely, in my mind, about higher aspirations of Governor Walz, he could have just gone and winged it. But clearly, he needed to make sure that on the national stage, he saved face, that he looked good, that there was more to it than just representing the state of Minnesota, representing our laws that he stands behind, that he has helped pass, and navigating this committee structure that he has spent 12 years working in. So that to me is the angle here, is that clearly, in my mind, it is more about that angle, that he had to make sure that to preserve his standing on the national stage, which we'll argue what that looks like later, that is why he chose to do this instead of, it just is mind-boggling to me that he didn't just use the attorneys, the PR, and the communication people within his own office, his own knowledge and expertise, and had to rack up this bill.
Can I ask you guys a question, though, like to my more partisan Republican friends? And Becky specifically, because you said you worked in Congress, what elected official doesn't go hire lawyers? By the way, this law firm who specifically navigates congressional subpoenas, that's one of their specialties. What elected official in this country does not consult outside lawyers or lawyers that specify in congressional subpoenas? I don't think there's a single elected official on the planet that doesn't do this, by the way. I get what you're saying. Maybe the money was a little bit much, but if Walz went and winged it and made it and gaffed, then you guys would have used his gaffes and been like, this guy's incompetent. So what do I want in a governor? I want a prepared governor who goes and tries to make sure that when he gives answers, he gives correct answers that are clear and concise. And if he needs a little prep to do it, I'm okay with that. I think this is just... there's nothing else you guys can really get him on in the state right now. That's truly what I think.
He has in-house counsel and he has our attorney general. So it's too bad that you don't think that they can prepare him enough. So thanks for showing us that. I think that it is a lot of money. Look, these DC lawyers and lawyers in politics, clearly they're making a lot of money per hour. But I think that it was a waste of taxpayer dollars when he has an in-house counsel and we have our attorney general. And they, again, and I'll reiterate, 12 years, Attorney General, 12 years in Congress, Walz, 12 years in Congress, but he also does have his in-house attorney.
Michael, I want to, we could bash this the whole time. I want to get your insight as a former Republican communicator, but also as a Harris Walz supporter. You've endorsed Governor Walz. Where do you come to this? Because it's been killing me to not ask you via text, but I wanted to get your take on this live on air.
I'm going to wear a variety of hats in answering this question. Number one, first of all, it's fair to be critical about the fees. That's what that's the job of the opposition, is to find things to complain about, and they are. Number one. Number two, it was a congressional subpoena. And so one of the things I've also wanted to point out to folks is that Walz did go to Washington, D.C. with a congressional subpoena. He did use taxpayer funds to pay for that. So was everyone in that room. The whole event was political theater. House Republicans, which is their authority to do, they issued congressional subpoenas. They dragged people in that they wanted to ask questions to. The fact that Walz took a belts and suspenders approach to making sure that he was covered, he wasn't walking into a friendly environment. He was walking into a congressional hearing where he received a subpoena, and everyone questioning him wanted him, on the Republican side, wanted him to fail and get tripped up. And also, I think every person who asked questions was a taxpayer, and every person who was staffing those people were taxpayers. And so the amount of taxpayer money in that room for what I would call a political stunt was probably much higher, exponentially higher than what Walz was paid. The reason why this is a clean hit is because there was an invoice. There's been a pretty consistent track record of people who are called in, reaching out to this firm, using it and doing it. And so it's a pretty cookie cutter story. I will remind Republicans, particularly legislative Republicans, that the approval for this funds was through I think it's the Legislative Advisory Commission. And so there's members of the legislature on that committee. I assume and I hope that when that when Walz requested payment for this, that the legislators on that committee vocally and passionately objected to the cost that was spent on that, because there is an oversight matter. And so I get it. I get the outrage. I understand. I think the outrage is fair. I think Republicans and opponents to Walz get to complain about everything he does. I think that, I think a fair analysis is, yeah, this was political theater. It was political theater on both sides. Walz lawyered up when he got a congressional subpoena. And I think a little bit of what the frustration is about the fees, which is fair to be critical of, but they didn't get that gotcha moment. They didn't get that pound of flesh out of him. And so I think the follow-up, or the second opportunity, or the kind of making kind of lemons out of lemonade, making lemonade out of lemons, is just to hit him on the fees, because he didn't have that gotcha moment. That political theater didn't produce the moment that you wanted. So you might as well bring up some type of process fight to complain about it. And they've gotten some mileage on it. I don't think it's going to impact Walz in any way, shape, or form going into next year. And so it's a process fight. News at 11.
And just to quickly add on really quick, like, I just want to make the point too that Michael made, which is like, Walz went in there, he was lawyered up, he was prepared, honest to God, probably, and they didn't take a pound of flesh, like he said. They didn't get him on anything that was like, oh my gosh, Tim Walz said this, it's a national story, or it's a statewide story. Maybe they should have gotten some lawyers. Maybe they should have gone and been prepared for those committee hearings. And by the way, listen, I know he's your friend, and I know you guys all like him. Tom Emmer needs to take a Xanax when he's questioning in this committee hearing. Like, the
Congressman Emmer.
Congressman Emmer should have took his Xanax before this meeting. Like, the way he was questioning Governor Walz was just absolutely absurd. Couldn't get a word in. Couldn't actually get anything of substance. And by the way, this is how I know this was political theater. This was a hearing on sanctuary state policies, quote unquote. And Brandon Gill of Texas, Representative Gill of Texas, was asking about what is a woman and trying to get Tim Walz to talk about trans issues. So if you really cared about the taxpayer dime, you'd be worried about why a representative from Texas is asking about trans issues during an immigration hearing. Like, it couldn't be any less serious on the Republican side than it was. And like Michael said, you can be upset with the fees all you want. That's a fair attack, but it's also boring and lazy. Everyone does it. Everyone in the room did it. That was the governor there answering questions. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. I will just put a pin in Michael's comment about a suspender and belt theory or something of that, because I'm curious about where that comes from. So let's chat about that at a different time. But moving into more about Governor Walz.
Did I say belt and suspenders?
Yeah.
Don't you know that approaches belts and suspenders?
No, don't you need one or the other? You don't use them together.
It's you wear a belt. Yes, the point is a belt and suspenders approach is when you double up. So you usually just wear suspenders, but if you put a belt on too, you're doing double duty. It's called belt and suspenders approach.
There you go. Simple as that. We don't need to chat about it later. Yep. Thanks for breaking that down for me. We do, before we wrap things up, where we got 2 little segments left. Quickly, just hitting on, in June, we had 2 rounds of polls that were released, starting with KSTP Surveys USA poll. This was conducted June 4th through the 7th, about 600 registered voters. And that one came out with 58% of Minnesotans somewhat or strongly approve of the governor's job performance, 39% somewhat or strongly disapprove, 3% not sure. And I'll come back to some of the other marks here, but I want to compare it with one that came out from the Star Tribune. This one was conducted June 16th to 18th of 800 Minnesota registered voters. And this one say 53% approve, or I'm sorry, 49% approve. So we have a little difference in here. The Star Tribune poll also is a significant dip from the one that was conducted last September, where 53% approved of Walz's performance. And so those numbers, approval ratings, are down since his presidential run. I want to start it with Michael on this one, putting you on the spot because you were a supporter of Walz's vice presidential candidacy. Do you think that having that larger national presence, maybe in Minnesota a little less, is what is to blame for these approval numbers, or would you point to something else?
No, I just think that the Minnesota politics related to Walz has been nationalized a bit. His approval rating is well above 50. I think he's in a very strong position should he want to run for a third term? And so there's a difference between the environment that he's in. There's stuff that people can look at these numbers. Historically, it's been unusual for someone to run for a third term, but his approval rating and variations on the polls is significant. And again, even if you accept the approval rating in the Star Tribune poll of 49%, the bottom line is this. Who are the Republican candidates that are running right now to knock him off? What are their fundraising totals? You can't beat something with nothing. And Walz has much more of is in much more of a polling situation and much more in a financial situation to be able to choreograph and orchestrate if he decides to run for third term and navigate that situation than any announced Republican today.
Fair. Julius, any fears or worries about these numbers?
No. Oh, no, not even a little bit. I don't see any scenario in which Tim Walz loses this third re-election campaign unless he got into a scandal that took down his governorship. But I think a couple things, right? His vice presidential campaign gave him national attention. He has a national fundraising base. This guy can raise double digits millions for this race, and no one in this state is going to compete with him, unfortunately. We've seen after years and years and years of Republicans putting up unserious candidates like Royce White and Scott Jensen, it's incredibly hard to convince donors, not only across the state for Republicans, but across the country, that this is a state worth investing in. And by the way, I think what doesn't help Republicans is that there's a Senate race going on. I think that's ultimately a big part of this, is people want to see who is going to be the next senator from this state, especially with a surprise announcement from Senator Smith not returning to office. So I think there's a couple of factors that play into it, but ultimately you're always going to have some fatigue when there's a third term, right? People generally just get tired of seeing the same face, and of course numbers are going to dip. Here's what I will say though. I actually do think there are Republicans that could make a good case against Walz. I will vote for Tim Walz. I will campaign for him. I think he's a great governor. But there are some Republicans that if I personally was running that campaign, I would be a little bit worried about because of the optics and because of their ability to communicate. One name I would give you that I think Republicans are going to overlook, but is someone that I think could be a good, or maybe not overlook, but could be a good candidate, is Julia Coleman. Suburban-ish mom, can make the economic case against Walz. Can she make the money? Probably not. I don't think there's enough out there for a Republican governor's race here. But I would like to ask Representative Fenton, are you thinking about throwing your name in the race? I heard that the Walz campaign is incredibly concerned about your candidacy, and I would be too, honestly. But will you be thinking about a run for governor?
I will not be thinking about a run for governor, but I appreciate you asking, Julius. But that's out the limit. That's out as well.
But she's not ruling out the Senate race.
She's
but
not
she's closed
ruling
the
out
No,
governor.
I'm not running for Senate. I'm not going to run for Senate either. No.
On a joking manner, but also being serious, I think really what Republicans should think about going into this next cycle is you need to put up a woman from the suburbs, like Representative Fenton, Representative Kristen Robbins. I think those are people that are going to bring a stark contrast to Walz, not only because of the messaging, but because they're fresh, they're new. You don't want Royce White or Scott Jensen up there. You want someone who can ideologically tussle with him and make the case for being a little bit more moderate in the state. So Representative Fenton, I think you should consider.
Julius, we do agree. I agree with you on one thing, and I too don't want to see a Royce White or a Senator Scott Jensen running up there again. So we do agree on that. But
Representative, I do want your take on this, though, and because I think that we're going to have lots of conversations as we move forward about candidates that are in, those have bowed out. I think we're all in agreement of what the potential best type of candidate is, and hopefully we get some of those in soon because that money is going to be necessary. One thing I am curious about your take on, as he weighs whether to run a third term or not, are you surprised that about 50% of Minnesotans do not want a third term from him, including, it says in the KSDP poll, just 77% of Democrats say he should run for a third term. Are those numbers lower than you would anticipate at this point, or about where you are because of, like Julius mentioned, some of that fatigue as we head into a potential third term?
there's a few things. First of all, I think that as you see it, the wider spread, the larger number of the voters that are polled, the more his popularity declines. Okay. So there was a wider swath in one of those polls where his numbers really declined. There's a couple of things. Right now, in my personal opinion, I think there's a little bit of overexposure and weird statements he's made from his national politics. I'm a knucklehead. I'm just a knucklehead. Okay. I didn't tell the truth, whatever. However, I think what matters to voters here in Minnesota is what is happening in Minnesota. And I can talk to you about door knocking. When I was door knocking in 2022, he's losing the center left Democrats support out here in the suburbs. I had a large number of Democrats supporting my candidacy when I ran, and they were frustrated. But the biggest issue that is catching up to him and will continue, I don't see it going away, is the fraud, the amount of fraud in these organizations that has happened under his watch. And I think I just came across the feds are now investigating another area of fraud in the housing stabilization. But we are in Minnesota now up to $1 billion+ lost to fraud under Governor Dayton's watch. Feeding Our Future, the daycare, stuff within daycare, the Autism Education Center, now housing stabilization, overpayment and Medicaid. The list goes on and on to hundreds of millions of dollars, now over $1 billion under his watch. That is catching up to him. The other thing that's happening, I think, is the Democrat socialist brand is overtaking the Democrat Party. And I think that can have an impact going into this next election as well. So those are my thoughts on what's happening as he's losing popularity. I think it's going to be harder. I think as time goes on a little bit, I think it's going to be harder for him to actually seek and win a third term. But again, Michael, I agree with you, though. We need to have someone formidable for the Republicans in order to make it really tough and hard for Governor Walz to run for a third term.
Now, for the Let the Record Show that no governor has won a third term since 1962, so will be interesting to see how this plays out. I think we expect to hear from him in the coming weeks of whether he is planning to do, as of course, just like we want to hear Republicans jumping in the race if he is not going to run for a third term, which I think we all anticipate he is. But if he is not, of course, he needs to open that door for Democrats to prepare and get ready as well. But before we end for the day, I want to throw it over to my co-host to share some exciting news of a new venture that he has started. Michael.
Yes, for our listeners who don't get enough of me just from the podcast, I started a Substack this week. I'm trying to compete with Julius, who started a Substack that I'm a big fan of. So I started a Substack. I'm going to share it in the links. It's called On the Record with Michael Brodkorb. We're going to do some commentary, some other political takes, some original research. I'm going to try to just expand on a number of topics, and I'm going to be promoting this podcast and some other work that I'm going to do. So check it out on Substack. I'll have it in the links. And all I'm really trying to do is to copy Julius.
We love it. Congratulations to both of you, giving yourself even more work each and every week. But we like to see the commentary, and so excited to read that. Your first Substack went out this week, the End of Minnesota Nice. So go check that out. Follow Michael on Twitter if you don't already, where he links to it. And of course, you can subscribe there. Thank you, Julius and Representative Fenton, for all of your takes here. We threw a lot at you both. There's a lot going on and a lot yet to come. So we expect to have you both back soon. And thank you for everything, Michael.
We want to thank you all for listening to this episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at BB BreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return next week. Thank you so much for being here today.
Bye.